Welcome to the second lecture, What is World Literature and Why Study It? This is an important question to ask before we begin reading and writing about literature and sharing our ideas with one another. Let's briefly consider what literature in general is. And an insanely simple definition would be written works such as novels, like To Kill a Mockingbird, short stories, plays, Shakespeare, poetry, essays, creative nonfiction like memoirs, all that have artistic merit and often provide insight into the human condition. This is perhaps the difference between, say, a novel written purely to entertain, like a detective novel or a mystery novel, and one that attempts to get at something deeper, something more significant than just telling a story. Another way of understanding literature might be this: it's the artistic treatment of language that results in an enduring work. So when we talk about global literature or world literature, generally speaking, we're talking about the study of literature of all historical periods, all places, all cultures, all peoples, not just that of the United States. Obviously, you can't do all of that in one semester or even 1 year. But that's what distinguishes world literature from, say, American literature or British literature or even introduction to literature, our English 200 course. I would like for you to watch this video about Mario Vargas Llosa, who's a Chilean novelist who won the Nobel Prize for Literature a while back. But in this interview, his remarks illustrate the rewards of studying world literature, and I hope you take a moment to watch it. So, why include the study of literature in the liberal arts core? Why study literature at all? First, literature has been a part of university education for well over 1,500 years, so you could say we should study it just for the tradition, like math, natural sciences, music, art. There's something about studying literature that people over the centuries have identified as being important. But as I say here, not all traditions are necessarily good traditions, so we need to get at a better answer than that. And another answer might be that reading, thinking about, and writing about literature is intrinsically and instrumentally rewarding. In other words, studying literature satisfies our need to engage in the creative enterprise, but it has practical skills in that it helps us be better prepared for the workspace, the professional space, to hone our skills in writing and critical thinking and analysis, interpretation, clear expression. These are all, of course, incredibly important in the workplace. And so finally, studying literature affords us the opportunity to engage in art, in the human desire to be connected to things that are beautiful and appealing. So I've used the phrase "a human experience" before. It's a phrase we're going to focus on quite a bit, and I want to talk a little bit more about it because it's an incredibly important concept to all of my courses, but especially this one. Essentially, the human experience refers to the collective experiences that most human beings share or experience. So whether you're talking about an ancient Egyptian or 21st century American, we all experience coming-of-age moments, both happy and sad ones. We all experience happiness and we all experience tragedy. We all experience joy and suffering, success and failure, and so forth. This is what we call the human experience, and enduring works of literature typically capture some aspect of the human condition. If you don't know who C.S. Lewis is by now, you should, so get out and get familiar with him. But C.S. Lewis once remarked that we also read to know that we're not alone. And he knew what it was like to be alone, having lost his mother at the age of 5, his incredibly lonely childhood and even adulthood. And what Lewis is getting at is that when we read literature, we're exploring what other people have experienced, and in that regard, we feel less alone, that we are part of this greater experience. So why study literature at all, whether it be American, British, world, South Dakota literature? And this is a question I'm asking you to think about in your first forum. But some other reasons to study literature is that literature has endured the ravages of time. There are some things that endure the ravages of time, and there are some things that don't. Works of literature that have something important to say. So whether it's the Greek epics, the Bible, ancient Indian Chinese poetry, there's a reason why we hold on to these, that we still publish them. As I say here, that you can go to Barnes & Noble and buy them today. Some works of literature, in fact, last longer than works of architecture, right? You've perhaps traveled to other countries and visited ruins, and someday those ruins will disappear, and many ruins already have. So there's something to be said about a work of literature that endures the test of time. And of course, literature brings enjoyment and satisfaction. You listen to a piece of music over and over again because it brings satisfaction. You look at art because it brings satisfaction. Same thing with literature. And again, I don't want us to lose that great remark that C.S. Lewis made, we read to know we're not alone. Yet another reason to study literature. For me, a really important reason to study literature is because of how central it is in human history. So even before the invention of writing, which is about 4,500, 5,000 years ago, humans were already creating literature, poetry, stories, laws, culture, folk tales, all being passed down through what we call the oral tradition. That's tradition that preceded writing. And as I say here, that's what hooked me early on in my youth, is this notion that literature existed long before writing, and that these stories and poems had been passed down for thousands and thousands of years. So, again, yet another reason to study literature. And getting back to C.S. Lewis's wonderful observation, we read to know we're not alone. Sometimes we want to read purely for pleasure, right? So you pick up a People magazine, or maybe you want to keep up on current events and you pick up a Time. But sometimes we're looking for something deeper, something more complex, something that's going to help us better understand what we call these existential questions. And to be sure, literature does that. Perhaps the most famous line in all of English literature is "to be or not to be." That is the question from Hamlet, right? Hamlet is thinking about what is the meaning of life. As I say here, even people who've never read or seen Hamlet know that these lines are from Hamlet. And so I want to encourage you to think about that. Why are these the most famous lines in all of English literature? If you go to China, you'll find that people there know "to be or not to be." You go to South America and people know Hamlet. Why is that? Why is Act 3, Scene 3 of Hamlet so powerful? So there are many other reasons to read literature as well, but these are some of the reasons that I hope you'll consider as we move on, as the course moves on. So, how to read for this course? First, read for enjoyment and fulfillment. Read with the expectation that you'll encounter something rewarding. If you read simply to fulfill the objectives of the assignment, it won't be very rewarding. Second, I recommend that you read with a pencil in your hand, to take notes, and a dictionary by your side. If you don't know the meaning of a word, you can't fully understand what's going on in the text. And so, two things: pencil in your hand, a dictionary by your side. Third, try to read the shorter works, especially the poems, at least twice. As I say here, you'll be amazed by how much the poem changes in just a second reading. Or the text. Sometimes the texts are too long to read, and I certainly don't expect you to read those twice. But you'll want to slow down and read them carefully. Fourth, read with the knowledge that these writers do not seek merely to entertain, but to express some sort of knowledge or insight about the world. They're not just telling stories purely for entertainment. They're trying to get at something deeper. And finally, I find that a lot of my students have been taught in middle school and high school that there's some sort of secret inside the literature box, and if you just analyze it enough, these hidden meanings will come flying out. That's simply not the case. Great writers don't try to hide secrets. They don't try to embed secret symbolism. So don't put that kind of burden on yourself, and certainly don't put it on the text. So as I say here, I always begin my classes, or at least my introduction to literature classes and in this class, by talking about why we read literature, with or without college. I think it's important to think about that and to realize that literature has been around longer than writing itself. It's one of the first things humans began doing, is expressing themselves in a literary manner. And I like for students to think about that. Finally, how to prepare for quizzes. The quizzes which end each unit are meant to be rewards for reading and participation, not a threat to force you to read. So if I wanted them to be a threat, I wouldn't administer them at the end of the unit. And the quizzes measure basic reading comprehension. They measure the degree to which you've engaged in the text. And so pay special attention to larger, important details, names, events, settings. These will all help you prepare for the quizzes. As I say here, I will not include questions that ask wildly difficult, obscure things, or really obscure references that only a scholar expert could answer. The questions are very reasonable in scope.